Welcome to the If You Could See Me podcast. Thank you for joining the movement. I'm your host, Erin Mahone. I'm an author, storyteller, facilitator, and mental health professional. I like to talk about big things, ask difficult questions, and challenge the ways in which we perceive ourselves, one another, and what's possible in the world. On this podcast, I speak to thinkers, makers, feelers, and folks fighting for change. You'll experience entertaining, thought-provoking conversations with people from all walks of life. I believe that mental health is health, and it goes so far beyond conversations about illness, medications, and treatment. Our mental health is essential to living our best lives, and I want to live in a world in which we talk about emotional wellness as easily and frequently as talking about the common cold. We aren't there yet, but I believe we can be. When I set out to create this thing, I had no idea what I was doing. Just that I wanted to share my story and I hoped I wasn't alone. I've discovered that so many people need to find solidarity. They need to know they aren't alone. Well, I'm here to tell you, you are not alone. We can have these difficult conversations in the light of day. We can laugh, joke, and get serious about making change. I've tried to create multiple entry points within this movement, and I hope you will take some time to check out all of our resources and consider sharing your story on our website, ifyoucouldseeme.com. There you can submit your story, find mental health resources, submit ideas or resources yourself, read the stories of other brave warriors, find out about future live events, and invite me to speak or give a workshop in your area. If you're inspired by what we're doing, I hope you'll consider helping out by visiting our Patreon page, patreon.com/ifyoucouldseeme, purchasing my book, rating and reviewing this podcast on iTunes to help people find us, or just send me a message to let me know how this project is impacting you, ways we can improve, and future podcast or blog topics. This was only an idea until amazing people like you joined me in bringing it to life. Enjoy the show. Hello, friends and family. I'm back. I decided inadvertently to take the summer off from the podcast and to slow down pretty much everything over the summer so that I could take advantage of some time with my kids and embark on a brand new adventure, and that is that I am returning to school to complete my master's degree in mental health counseling, finally, after far too many years of waiting and putting it off. I finally have decided to do that, and some other things have been going on that I will talk about as time passes. But I've been really trying to take advantage of the privilege of having turned 40 this year. It seems to me that it's become a much larger occasion than I had thought that it would be. And I realized that I'm learning how to relax, how to calm down, how to not take everything so seriously, and how largely to be a person who just sits still. It's hard for me to sit still. Still, after having practiced for the last several months, I still feel a fair amount of guilt in those moments when I'm just sort of sitting around doing nothing, listening to a really interesting podcast and playing a game on my phone, or sitting still in my house, not working constantly. I love my work and I love what I've been doing and have had the opportunity still to continue doing some really interesting things this summer and building some really exciting new projects, some new workshops, some new education that I've gotten, some new partnerships, and even more sort of coming down the pike. But I have made a very intentional decision to slow down this summer and just breathe and just be and to just listen to the world a little bit, to look at my children and watch them and listen to them constantly fighting with one another. Because it's summer and they're home, and I don't believe in over scheduling them every day. So, they get sick of each other sometimes. And then they have to learn how to deal with that. And one day, I suppose, I will be happy that I gave them that opportunity. And most of the time, I'm happy now, but sometimes it's just very loud. This year, I returned to work in the mental health field in full force, returning to disability case management and seeing a full picture of just how truly broken our service delivery system is in the state of Virginia. I know that it's bad in many other places. We are, however, in Virginia, one of the worst in the country for these services, for funding, and ultimately it's been truly eye-opening to see whole swaths of our disability population be completely ignored and undermined. And so I'm working on building relationships and advocacy network in that new awareness. Not that I wasn't aware, because I had worked in this field previously, but some legal changes happened a number of years ago, and I was under the impression that things were getting better. And having returned to this field, I see that things are indeed worse than they were before. And so right now I'm trying to learn as much as I possibly can, and I'm meeting with a lot of people, and I'm talking to folks and talking to my lawmakers and parents and advocates in the community, and just trying to figure out where do we go from here? How do we help to meet the needs of folks with various developmental disabilities? If you have an autism diagnosis right now in the state of Virginia, things can potentially look very bleak. And, that's across the board for people with many different types of diagnoses. And it shouldn't be specific. If you have a disability, then you should be able to get the services and the supports that you need in order to live a full life, and everyone is entitled to that. And so you'll probably hear me talking more about this as we move forward. But I am certain that you are here to listen to this episode, this interview that I did a couple of months ago, and I'm excited to finally be dropping it for as episode 1 of season 2 of the If You Could See Me podcast. This was probably the most, if not one of the most intimidating interviews that I've done, in all honesty. Lisa Jakub is the real deal. She is, a retired child movie star, but she is now an accomplished yoga instructor and speaker and facilitator of workshops, and an author of 2 fantastic books. I was honored to participate with her on the mental health panel for the Charlottesville Festival of the Book back in March. And we really hit it off, and seem to have a lot in common as creative women who both live with anxiety and depression. And it was a really huge pleasure to talk to her, even though I have to say that I was a lot more nervous talking to her than I normally am talking to people. And ultimately, I think there's no other word. I felt intimidated by her and by all that she's accomplished, and she's incredibly poised and well-spoken, and not that most of the women I've spoken to, and men as well, aren't completely wonderful as they are, but this one in particular was a little intimidating, and I'm just putting that out there because we always talk about, we're going to point out imperfection here and talk about vulnerability and talk about, the fact that we don't always have it together. And sometimes we're just showing up and hoping that the right words come out. And so, maybe you can feel that. Maybe I'm setting it up, who knows, but she's a brilliant woman, and she's doing really good work in this world, and I was excited to meet her and to talk to her about all of her different experiences, and see some parallels and see some huge differences. And so I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome back to season 2 of the If You Could See Me podcast. Please rate and review us on Apple iTunes. Please visit the website at www.ifyoucouldseeme.com. Feel free to share and tell your friends. And as always, we welcome you to share your own story, your own experience on our website. We want to know, we want our audience to know, we want you to know that you're not alone, we're not alone, and having a forum for folks to be able to share their own experiences is part of this project as well. So thanks so much again, as always, for your love and support, and enjoy the show. This is my interview with Lisa Jakub. Hello, friends and family, and welcome to yet another episode of the If You Could See Me podcast. I'm Erin Mahone, and I am super excited to be joined here today by one of my newest friends, fellow author, yoga instructor, Charlottesville, Virginia lover, and former child and young adult actress, Lisa Jakub. Lisa, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Erin, I'm so excited to talk to you.
So we met several months ago sitting on a mental health panel for the Charlottesville Festival of the Book. As you and I and our fellow panelist, Zach Bonney, all wrote books about our mental health journeys. Why don't you start off by talking a little bit about what brought you to that particular event, and how you ended up being an author?
Yeah, so I wrote a book called Not Just
That's
Me.
how it usually happens, right?
Yeah, it's how you often become an author. The whole writing process really makes it inevitable. Yeah, so I wrote this book called Not Just Me, Anxiety, Depression, and Learning to Embrace Your Weird. And I wrote it because anxiety has played a large role in my life since I was a kid. And I wanted to talk about that more. And I realized that the books I saw on the topic were either really clinical, written by doctors and written in a tone that made it seem like they were written by doctors, or they were very anecdotal, like, hey, let me tell you this funny story of what life is like living with anxiety. And I wanted something in the middle. I wanted something that both was a bit of a memoir where I could share my story, but also where I could give other people a platform for them to share their stories so we could see all these different versions of what anxiety and depression looks like on the ground in everyday life in all kinds of people. And then I also wanted to have the research, the science, the ideas of things that you can try, because anxiety and depression will always tell you this is how it's going to be forever. Settle in, your life is just going to suck. And I wanted to have a lot of things in there where it's like, okay, there is no perfect cure. There's nothing that's going to fix everything forever. But there are a lot of different things that maybe can make your life a little bit easier. So maybe try this or maybe try this, and just have suggestions and ideas of, how that worked in other people's lives, what they found helped them. And then maybe that could be inspiring for people who were really struggling with these things, because there are so many of us and we all think we're alone. We all think we're just crazy and weird, and we can't possibly share this with anybody else because we will be uniformly rejected for our issues. Yep. And so that was just, it was really a book that I wanted to read. And so I wrote it.
And you know what? That's why I love you. That's why I think you're fantastic, because, you're not sitting on the sidelines. You're like, if there isn't something out there that is meeting my exact need, I'm going to go out and make it myself.
I think we all need to do a little bit of that in our lives. I really think that it's so, not only is the process, the process was incredibly beneficial for me. The process of writing this book, of talking to all of these people about anxiety, of doing all this research, it was amazing for me. It was a really, really wonderful experience. So not only is it enriching for us when we do that sort of thing, but then you can see the ripple effects, because I know I'm not the only one who needed that kind of book. I know that there are other people out there, and that's proven to be true. So it's funny, when you kind of dive into your own curiosity and your own needs, it ends up fulfilling that in other people as well, which I think is just sort of a fantastic thing.
It's absolutely the truth. I feel the same way. My book is very different, but I feel the same way about the process of its creation. I was doing what I needed to be doing for my own wellness and my own mental health. And the process of doing it completely changed my life, and also, opened me up to exactly what you're saying, that there are so many other people who live with these diagnoses, and sometimes it's challenging and sometimes it's debilitating, and other times it's an enormous blessing to be gifted with this brain that is complicated and gets overwhelmed sometimes, but also, on the flip side of that, is able to see that humanity in other people, and learning how to embrace what I consider to be the positives now, only happened through the process of writing the book and creating my show, and this, this thing that we've created with If You Could See Me. It really is, learning how to see our lives and our experiences in a different way.
Yeah. And there is a community that's created around that. So something that started off being very personal and private and, for me, potentially shameful, ends up just becoming something that not only helps other people, but brings us all together a little bit more, which I think is much needed these days.
One of the things that I have found myself saying a lot recently, and it's probably happened a couple of times on podcast recordings. So for anybody who's listened to all these recordings, you'll have to excuse me continuing to repeat this, but there's nothing more true in my experience. And I even said it in a show last week. I walked around with the shame and the fear of sharing my experience, of sharing the family, experiences that I had, my individual life experiences. And I felt like I had to hide who I was and where I came from, and the pain that I felt, and had to, try and be perfect all the time, or at least trying to appear perfect all the time. And because I knew that no one could possibly love or respect me if they knew who I really was. And when I finally just kind of pushed through that and started saying who I really was anyway, I found out that people loved me more and they respected me more than they had before. And that has been just the most unbelievable gift. And I'm free now. I don't have to hide anymore, and I feel a lot less weight from, in that process.
Absolutely. And that's why this whole embrace your weird thing
I love
has
that.
become,
I love that.
yeah, it's really become my mantra, because everybody has something about them that they think is just so fundamentally weird that they have to hide it because other people won't love them if they find out.
Right.
And when we can step out from underneath the shame of that and really embrace that weird whatever, that's where our individuality comes in. That's when our unique perspective of the world comes from. And when we can learn how to work with that instead of shoving that under the carpet and thinking that there's something wrong with us, when we can really embrace that, that's when all the good things happen. Right. That's when all the good things started happening for me. When I was like, you know what, screw it. I am done. The amount of energy it takes me to try to hide and be someone that I'm not, and not own up to my past and my experiences and my issues. I have so much energy for other things now, because I'm not constantly walking around, wearing this giant suit of armor and a mask so that people can't see me.
I've heard so many people talk about the mask lately. It just, I feel like this movement is growing, for all of us, this willingness and this openness for us to embrace our weird, as you say, and to share what's true about the human experience, the human condition. And I mean, I'm heartened on the one hand that, people are becoming so much more open. And I'm also, saddened by the fact that it feels like it's these issues are so pervasive in our culture right now. You are in addition to being an author, you are a yoga instructor, and you teach all over, and you give workshops, and you combine writing and yoga in a sort of therapeutic way. Can you talk a little bit about how things have changed in your participants and your students, and the things that you're hearing from them, since you started doing this? Are people more open?
It's so amazing, because I do these workshops they're usually over 3 days, over a weekend. And the majority of the people that come have anxiety, have depression, have issues that make it really challenging to leave the house, go to a place they've never been, stay overnight with strangers, be in a group setting, not know what they're really in for. And it's the most incredible thing, because I see so much bonding. I see so much growing. I see so much really intentional work being done, which is like, hey, I have this going on. I'm not, broken. There's nothing, detrimentally wrong with me. I just have this thing that makes my life really hard sometimes. And when we can all dive into that together and say, like, here are some ideas, like, why don't we try this? Why don't we look at this? Why don't we discuss this? When there's just this environment of empathy, compassion, love, acceptance, and combining that with scientifically proven methods for helping our brains to deal with these things better, a whole bunch of just like magic shit happens, and it's just so I'm so honored to be able to see it and participate in it. And I get as much out of it as the participants do. And, I've now been doing it for long enough that some of the students that I've had in the earlier workshops, I can see the changes they have made in their lives since they came to the workshop.
Mm-hmm.
Be that something in a family relationship that they have made a shift, or a work situation. Maybe they've left their job and found a new job, or they're just looking at things in a different way. And this stuff can be really profound and have lasting implications. And it's such an honor for me to be able to see that and share that, because that's exactly what I found when I started with a meditation practice and then later a yoga practice. And everything just sort of shifted for me. It didn't happen overnight. It took a lot of work, but I can see kind of the trajectory that happened after I started being more intentional about these things. And it was such a benefit and such an important thing for me that it just feels so great to be able to share that and watch other people get it and have the same kind of results of, okay, it's not like everything in my life is fixed, but it's better. And
Right.
it's better because I have these tools now, and I have this perspective that I didn't have before. And it's amazing to see time and time again. And it works. It keeps working.
Yep.
And that's what's phenomenal to me.
It's amazing. I mean, I feel like you and I are like living parallel to one another in so many ways that it's so serendipitous that we met, because I feel the exact same way. I do these storytelling workshops that are, I mean, they don't incorporate yoga, but we do incorporate mindfulness and meditation and that group support that you talk about. And ours are classes, so they last 6 to 7 weeks, and by the end the participants have developed such a kinship with one another and with me. And we're all like, we need to keep in touch with each other, we need to stay together, we're going to miss one another. And I've seen several people have taken the class more than once, and I've seen huge shifts in people's entire perspective of their lives. And all it really is in your case and in my case, is just creating a safe and nurturing space for these very the nurturing of these very sort of fundamental aspects of human life that we have completely erased from value.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of telling your story, of sitting quietly, of connecting with other people, of focusing on your breath, of checking in with your body, all of these things that our very fast-paced society, we just are constantly in a rush, and we don't stop and just sit in a room and look at each other and say your story means something. And it is, you are absolutely right, and I say it all the time, it is just magic.
That's so cool. I'm so glad that we got to connect, and I'm just so happy there are other people in the world doing this work, because I think it's super important.
It is. I totally agree with you. So prior to all of this amazing work that you had been doing, you had another job. And I want to lead into that by reading a quote that I told you I was going to read today, that sort of illustrates beautifully the transition from your earlier life to your current life. It says, "It's never too late to change your mind about who you were meant to be. Our minds can be really powerful things, and they can come up with a million reasons as to why you can't make a change. Our minds can say that it's not logical, or it's been like this for too long, or it's too hard, or what are people going to think? But sometimes it's more important to live from your gut and from your heart than from your head. It's okay to decide that being happy is worth more than getting the law degree or marrying your high school sweetheart because they were nice enough, or being an actor because you think you're incapable of doing anything else.
It's never too late to take charge of your destiny and make a different contribution to the world. So you did these things, and I'm going to let you explain, how that is. But, you did it, you lived that truth, and now you're helping other people to do the exact same thing and, in totally different ways than you did. But, to see that having a different life and changing the perspective of what's possible for you is something that is possible. So you were a child actor, a really, really successful child actor. For those people in the audience who don't know, Lisa starred opposite Robin Williams in Mrs. Doubtfire as his older daughter. She starred in one of my all-time favorite movies, Deep Impact. I know it's super, that's ridiculous to say, but it really is. I loved that movie.
It was Independence Day, actually.
It was? I'm sorry. Did I say the wrong thing? It was Independence Day. I apologize.
Okay.
I went on such a date to Independence Day. I meant to say that. With a boy that I had been in love with for 1,000 million years, who never looked at me and never paid any attention to me. And he took me to see Independence Day. And it was like one of the highlights of my life. And so
so glad.
Just so you know, my 18-year-old self, that movie has a very, very sweet place in my heart. So I never thought for a million years that I'd be sitting on a panel of authors with you. So you were all the things. You had the thing that, that once upon a time in my life as a young actor, it was all the things that I thought that I wanted. What changed for you?
So I started acting when I was 4, and between the age of 4 and let's say 20, I pretty much enjoyed my job. I worked a lot, I traveled a lot, and I really I enjoyed it. It was mostly fun. There were challenges, there were things that were frustrating, there were definitely things I missed out on. I didn't really go to school much, all of that. But then when I was in my early 20s, I was living in Los Angeles and doing the whole Hollywood thing. And it just started to feel like I was living somebody else's life. Like this was a dream life, everybody kept telling me, but it felt like somebody else's dream. And it just didn't feel like my authentic path. I wasn't enjoying it anymore. I had always had anxiety and occasional depression, but it was getting debilitating. It was hard for me to leave my house. It was hard for me to leave my closet. I spent a lot of time crying on the floor of my closet. And I just looked around and, I had bought my house in Los Angeles when I was 15. I was doing the whole red carpet premiere thing a lot. I was working a lot. It looked like I was happy. And what was actually keeping me there was momentum and fear, because it was all I had ever known. I was, at that point I was 22. I didn't have a high school diploma. I just didn't have time to go to high school. So I did not know what else I could possibly do other than be an actor. And I felt very stuck, which I know might sound crazy to people, but I felt stuck in the life that I was in. And it felt like I was wearing a pair of jeans that was just 5 sizes too small. I just felt suffocated, and I felt like a phony, someone who was faking this. And I looked around at my actor friends who were all just thrilled to be in Los Angeles and doing what they were doing. And I was so jealous of them. I was like, I want to have passion in my life. I want to be doing something that I feel good about. And so many people want my job, and they should have it because I don't want it anymore. So I made the massive decision to leave Los Angeles. I just basically walked out one day, called my agent, said I'm done, and moved to Virginia, and was like, okay, what do I do now? And it took me a very long time. I was I was in sort of a state of shock of what I had done. I didn't have a plan. All my friends were pretty pissed off at me that I had left Los Angeles and kind of stubbed my nose at this industry that they loved. I had a very supportive, wonderful boyfriend, so that I had on my side, but no education, no plan, no skills other than I can cry on cue. It was really a challenge to figure out how I wanted to reinvent myself, how I wanted to find what was really going to feel like something that was authentically my contribution. And it took a while. It definitely, there were some things I tried and they didn't work and I wasn't good at them and I didn't enjoy them. And I eventually realized, so I got my GED and I went to college, which was a fascinating experience to be in college at age 30. But I realized that I was spending a lot of my time trying not to be a writer. I have been a writer since I can hold a crayon. It's just how I process the world, but I was always so terrified to let anybody see anything I had written. And so I kept doing all these things saying like, well, yeah, no, I can't be a writer because I can't put myself up for that kind of criticism and rejection. And no, it's too much. And also being a writer had always sort of seemed like saying I wanted to be a superhero or an astronaut or something just totally ridiculous, because writers were so amazing that I didn't ever feel like I could possibly claim that for myself. But I
find that you were a movie star.
And yet being a writer was the thing that was sacred to me, not being a movie star.
Right, exactly.
And eventually I realized that it was ridiculous that I had left Los Angeles to find something I was passionate about. And now I was looking at writing and going, no, I'm too passionate about that. I can't possibly do that. That's too special.
Right.
Like, why leave LA anyway? That was just ridiculous if I wasn't going to truly embrace something that I loved.
Mm-hmm.
So that is eventually how I got to writing. And I had my first book, which was a memoir, knocking around in my head for quite a while. And so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to write this. I'm never going to show it to anybody, but I just want to see if I can write a book in a year. I'm going to see what happens. And 10 months later, I had my book. And my husband read it. And my husband is amazing, and he never humors me, which I love about him. Like,
that's awesome. Yes.
If the dress doesn't look great, he's going to be like, it doesn't look great. And then I know when I walk out of the change room and he's like, damn, then I believe him, you know?
Yeah.
So my husband read the book and he said, I feel like you've written something that is actually bigger than a story of growing up in movies and then leaving Los Angeles and deciding what you're going to do with your life. I feel like it's this universal experience of figuring out who you want to be when you grow up.
Yeah.
And so he said, why don't you just try and get it published and see what happens? And I did. And then I wrote the second book, and the second book was all about depression and anxiety. And now I'm working on the third book, and all of a sudden I'm a writer.
Look at that. It only took how many years?
Like 17.
Right, exactly. That thing that just happens overnight over 17 years.
Yeah.
It's so true. I think about your experience of, basically growing up in Hollywood in the entertainment industry. From the age of 4 years old, I mean, you don't have total agency or understanding at 4 years old, to know what you want to do with your life beyond what you like to do from moment to moment. And, when you think about how you said your friends were all very angry with you, which I mean, of course, anybody who grew up in the regular world and, moved to LA to pursue their dream, they were essentially making the decision that you eventually made when you decided to become a writer. How did you were you able to salvage some of those friendships, and were people eventually able to understand why you made that decision for yourself?
I think some people were. Absolutely. And then I think there are other people who will never understand it. And I kind of have such an extra little bit of love for those people.
Right, exactly.
Because I'm like, you are so devoted and in love with this industry. This is absolutely where you should be. And it's kind of amazing that you look at me and think like, how can you possibly have ever made this decision? It just shows me like they are in the right place for them. It's similar for me. I don't think I would ever say this to someone, but I feel like people who are like, oh, I'm just done. I'm not gonna write anymore. I'm just gonna go do something else. I'm like, are you kidding me?
How could you do that?
How could you possibly walk away from the best thing ever? You get
Right.
to be a writer. You get to put words on paper. There's nothing more magical than that. And so I understand where they're coming from when it's hard to understand why I would leave. But I do think a lot of people from my old life are kind of like, oh yeah, I get it. I see how she's happier and feels more fulfilled. And
you made a whole new life, a whole career at this point. You're in the second phase of your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really interesting because I was not by any means a child star, but I did grow up with outsized ability to do certain things in the performance world. And I moved to New York and I, pursued that. But very quickly into my, young adulthood, realized I don't want to do this. And it was, as you said, the thing that I had always done, that everyone expected for me to continue doing forever, whether I, made it onto Broadway or made it into movies or whatever. The expectation was from my family, from everybody, you are going to sing and perform on stage. That's what you're going to do. And I realized that I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to pursue that. And then also had a sort of crisis of identity and went, well, if I don't do this, then who am I as a human being? I am entirely defined by the fact that I can stand on stage and sing a song. And even though, I wasn't, on the red carpet, it still very much defined my identity as a young person. And it was a very long time before I realized, I went back to school. I got degrees in, behavioral and social sciences, and, went into the human services and worked in nonprofits and did all of these things. And then it occurred to me many years later, I can combine my creative background with these issues that I feel like are so important in my life, and I can be the kind of artist that I want to be. I don't have to fit into anybody's box or anybody's expectation about what it's supposed to look like. And it took a really long time for me to understand that I'm allowed to do that.
Yeah. The whole permission slip for creativity is a very interesting issue, I think. And the permission slip for being who you think you might really be. And we don't really know, right? That's the thing. I think it's, something we hear a lot, just like be yourself. Sometimes we don't know who we are.
Exactly. And you have to go through those periods of time where you really do feel lost and you don't know what the right thing is. And you try on a bunch of different hats to determine whether or not, that's the right fit. And like you said, I went through that too, where I was just like, I'm really bad at a lot of things. And there are a few things that I'm pretty good at, but there are a lot of other things that I am terrible at. But I wouldn't trade finding that out for the world.
Oh, the failures are what teach you.
Right.
The things that I failed at, the things that I messed up, things that I tried and went, oh my God, look, I'm miserable. Nope, not this.
Right.
Got to turn around, back up. Those teach you so much more than the successes do.
And we're also afraid, and we avoid that like the plague. Like as parent, I mean, I have 3 kids that, you know, everybody's always trying to help their kids avoid ever making a failure, ever making a decision that they have to then backtrack on. And it's just like, no, man, like that's the gift.
Yeah, it really is. And learning, I think it's so important to be able to learn how to pick yourself up after those failures.
Yes.
Because when you don't have them, you're going to have a failure eventually, right? I mean, it's just inevitable. That's the human experience. Mm-hmm. And so I think the more you have, the better you get at them.
Yeah.
And so if you guard yourself against failures for so long, then inevitably when you have one, it's going to be a lot harder to pull yourself out of it and figure out how to backtrack.
Right.
When it's not that big of a deal. It's really not. And it's not that big of a deal to start something and then to change your mind and realize that, oh, this isn't actually working. And I think having the ability to do that and the kindness towards ourselves that allows that to happen, it just makes your life so much richer and more interesting. Because when you're so scared of all those things, it means you stay inside your box.
Right.
It means you stay quiet and small and, you know, keep everything just as it is and keep going with the momentum because that feels safe. And it is safe. And, you know, that'll work for a while until something, you know, destroys the box and throws you out of it. And then you have to figure out what to do anyway.
Right. It always happens. And so often, you know, we think we've done everything right. And then we realize, oh, wait, I haven't done everything right because things fell apart anyway.
Yeah.
Or because I denied that innate curiosity about the world and about what I might be able to do, and ended up filling that curiosity and that those sort of gaps with destructive behavior or things that you know that fill those holes temporarily, and we, instead of just being open to what's possible, instead of just saying yes to uncertainty on occasion, I want to like inject that out into the world and just say it's okay not to know the answers. It's okay to sit in your shit for a while and just be like, well, I thought it was one way and it's a different way. Now, where do we go from here?
And I think so many of us get stuck in this cycle of perfectionism and thinking there is such a thing as being perfect.
Right.
And perfectionism, I mean, first of all, perfect doesn't exist.
Right.
And also what we're striving for when we strive for perfection, it's boring.
Yes.
You know, imperfection, that's where the possibilities lie. That's where the interesting stuff is. That's where the stuff that is unique and different and really new is in the imperfection. And so many of us, I think, are striving for this ideal that not only is imaginary, but is just kind of dull.
Right. And destructive ultimately, because it is imaginary. And because when you get there, you realize, oh shit, this is really boring. Like, I am fucking bored out of my mind and I need to do something to make my life more exciting.
Yeah.
And then, oh, you know, who knows what comes from that. But you're absolutely right. The act of learning self-compassion, of encouraging one another to find that in ourselves and to you know, instead of that continuous thing that women have done to one another historically, of, you know, pretending to be perfect and then being horribly judgmental of people who, you know, aren't.
Yeah.
I feel like there's this wave of women who, among women who, we're just like, we're tired of that. We don't want that anymore. There are enough seats at the table at this point in our history that we can start supporting one another and holding each other up instead of tearing each other down.
I love that. I think that's incredibly important. And I think what you just said is incredibly important is we're starting to get more seats at the table now.
Yeah.
And maybe that was an issue before of there's only one seat, so you gotta tear down the girl next to you in order to get it. And that's not gonna work anymore.
No, and I just think that I don't know if it's millennials or, it's annoying that everybody blames everything on millennials, but I have to say that I do believe that there is these upcoming generations and these young adults now. I mean, millennials are in their 30s now, but but the idea that this is just generations of people who have grown up without that backbiting and with that more sensitive mentality, and now the expectation is not all necessarily wrapped up in being the best so much as it is about life balance and having a well-rounded human existence on the planet. And I love that. I think that that's fantastic. I want us all to have that. So if that's the flip side of all the terrible things that we talk about, the millennials and subsequent generations are bringing to our society, their willingness to have a bigger picture view of things is, I think, is really potentially very healthy for the future.
Yeah, I agree.
So you worked with someone who is sort of at the head of the, mental health conversation within pop culture, and that's Robin Williams. And I'm curious to know, as an adult, as the person you are now, I'm sure you didn't know about his history or, whatever when you worked with him as a teenager. But, now that you are in the place where you are and you have become an outspoken advocate for emotional wellness and mental health, how are you impacted by the relationship that you had with him and the relationship that the world really has with him?
Actually, when we were filming Mrs. Doubtfire, I was 14, and Robin talked to me a lot about his issues with mental health, his issues with addiction. And that was something that I really valued at the time, and obviously still do. He was really open with me about the struggles that he had, and he very much wanted to kind of warn me about pitfalls and issues that might show up for me as a young person working in the film industry. And as somebody that we knew each other very well. We filmed for, it was quite a lengthy shoot. And so we spent a lot of time together, and he knew that I was, very sensitive and very emotional and had issues with anxiety. And I talked openly with him about that. And so I think it was very inspiring for me at the time to realize, like, hey, here's an adult who has had a lot of problems with these things, and he is talking very openly. And that's brave and awesome and not something I saw a lot of. So his lack of, he didn't want to hide it. He didn't feel a need to do that. And so that, I feel like, has carried on and has impacted me a lot, in that I want to be the same way. And yeah, I think, his death was completely shocking to me, as it was to everyone else. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's still hard to wrap my mind around, and it's still hard to realize that he was suffering as much as he must have been. And there are all kinds of, complications with his, mental health diagnosis, as well as physical health diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And all of those sorts of things are complicated, and we will never know exactly what it was that kind of was it for him, that he made that decision.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the fact that he talked to me about that really changed things for me. Mm-hmm. And I want to carry that on.
It's really the most important thing. Being open. And, when you were 14, that was the early 90s, right? I mean, people didn't talk about mental health in an open and healthy way. I mean, it was all very salacious and judgmental and accusatory. And you looked at people who had, especially celebrities, who had struggled with their mental health through addiction or, whatever the case may be, with a sort of pointing of the finger and look at this person and how they've screwed up their lives, as opposed to the way that I think we're getting a little bit better at, although, we certainly have a problem with paparazzi, et cetera, still, but the idea that a person who is struggling with their mental health is a person who is sick, is a person who is in pain, is a person who needs to be, who needs help, not judgment and looked down upon. And so the idea that he was open with you and that you were able to have that experience of hearing someone honestly and lovingly talk to you about their own struggles is a gift that can't be undervalued.
Yeah. No, I think things are definitely changing. I think they could be moving a little faster.
Of course, they always can.
But I think there is definitely a shift, and I think it's just a wonderful thing. I think it's really going to save lives, literally.
I agree. I totally agree. I feel like those of us who, in whatever way, were impacted as young people and who, had it in my family that, my grandfather had schizophrenia. And so, speaking openly about the effects of significant mental illness and mental health diagnoses was a fairly regular part of my upbringing. And so the idea that I knew that I understood that this was a person who was struggling with something. It wasn't a person who was making a choice to be difficult or be bad, or that there was humanity and there was compassion there. I feel like we have this responsibility to then step forward later in our lives, or whenever, to really speak up on behalf of that, because there is so much misunderstanding and there is so much negativity around this just because people are afraid.
Yeah. Yes.
There's so much fear. I don't know. I just stopped in the middle of that statement, but there's so much fear.
And I think what changes that is conversation and community and compassion.
Totally.
Oh, the 3 C's. Let's make that a thing.
Conversation, community, and compassion. Let's do it.
I love that.
That's the beginning. Yeah, I completely agree. Okay, well, I could talk to you for the rest of the afternoon, but I know that you have stuff to do. So before we are done, please share the places where people can find you and the titles of your books, so that my audience can go out and grab them, and anything else that you want the world to know about Lisa Jakub.
Fantastic. So I have 2 books. The memoir about growing up in Los Angeles and making the decision to leave and then trying to figure out who I was beneath the actor is called You Look Like That Girl. And which I still hear, which is amazing. I was 14 when I shot Doubtfire. I am 39 and people are still like, you know who you look like?
And you look exactly the same, Lisa. That's why they say that, because you look exactly the same.
We'll thank yoga for that. So that is the memoir. And then my second book is Not Just Me, Anxiety, Depression, and Learning to Embrace Your Weird. And my website is Lisa Jakub. Jakub is JAKUB.net. And I am in all the usual places, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So you can find me there. And
you are fantastic on Twitter. You are so funny. I love following you. I still haven't figured out how Twitter works. It's been a very long time, and I'm very embarrassed to say that I'm too long-winded, but you're so funny on Twitter.
Oh, thank you. I mostly just talk about like tacos and put pictures up of my dog. So
you're very funny though. The way you talk about tacos, and your dog the other day yesterday, you posted something was hysterical.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that you enjoy it. It's a fascinating medium, Twitter. The social media, it's such a double-edged sword. It can be really difficult, but it can also have this amazing way of bringing people together. So I
totally agree.
That way. And if we can't gather around funny dog videos, like, we are truly lost as a civilization.
I totally agree with that. Completely.
Let that be my parting statement.
I love that parting statement. Lisa, thank you so much. I really hope that I'm so glad that you live in Virginia, and I hope that we can find other ways to come together and spread our message of, what did we say? Community, compassion and conversation to the world. Thank you so much for what you do, for your beautiful words, and keep going.
Thank you so much. This was fantastic. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Enjoy your weekend.
You too.
Thank you.